2 hours into the movie, and I was feeling the buzz from the whiskey. Katie and I had settled into a comfortable silence, watching some indie drama about marriage. I wasn't paying much attention to the plot, too focused on the warmth creeping through my body from the drinks. Katie, however, seemed oddly absorbed. Her eyes rarely left the screen, and when they did, it was only to glance quickly at her phone. The characters on screen were arguing about infidelity. The wife was confessing. The husband was losing his mind. I made some offhand comment about how cheating was a deal-breaker, and to my surprise, Katie responded. "Why are you so sure?" she asked, keeping her eyes on the TV. "What if she regrets it? What if it was just a mistake?" I shrugged, thinking she was just talking about the movie. A mistake? It's not a mistake if you go through with it. If you're going to cheat, you clearly don't respect your partner. Trust is everything. Without it, you have nothing. She finally looked at me, and something in her expression made me pause. But what if the husband finds out on his own, before the wife confesses? Doesn't that change things? There was a strange edge to her tone, one I hadn't noticed before. I shifted in my seat, suddenly uncomfortable. "No, it doesn't," I said, my voice firmer than I expected. "Cheating is still cheating, no matter how it comes out." Katie didn't respond. She turned back to the screen, but the conversation lingered between us like a bad smell. I felt a sudden urge to ask why she'd even brought it up, but I pushed it down. Maybe I was overthinking things. Maybe it was just the alcohol. Still, her words stuck with me as the credits rolled, and I realized I hadn't been paying attention to the last half of the film. I glanced over at her. She was already on her phone, typing furiously, her lips pressed into a thin line. A feeling of unease settled in my stomach, but I didn't know why. After the movie, Katie went upstairs, saying she was tired and heading to bed early. I stayed downstairs, nursing another drink, trying to shake off the strange tension from our conversation. The house was quiet, too quiet. I wandered over to the fireplace, still thinking about what Katie had said. It felt like she had been testing me somehow, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it. That's when I noticed it, the smell of smoke, faint but unmistakable. I leaned closer to the fireplace, and my heart skipped a beat. There was fresh ash in the hearth, and the logs that had been there earlier were burned down to blackened stubs. I frowned. We hadn't used the fireplace in weeks, not since the weather had warmed up. Why had Katie suddenly decided to burn something? I knelt down, sifting through the ashes with a poker, but whatever had been thrown in there was gone, reduced to nothing but soot and smoke. A strange feeling of dread washed over me. Katie had been downstairs for a while before the movie, talking on the phone. She'd said it was work, but now, standing in front of the fireplace, I wasn't so sure. What had she burned? Why now? I stood up, feeling suddenly restless. I walked through the living room, and that's when I noticed the back door was slightly ajar. I pulled it open, stepping out into the cool night air. The wind stirred the trees, carrying with it the scent of the woods. Everything looked normal, but something felt wrong. Katie had always been meticulous about keeping the doors locked, especially at night. But here it was, wide open. The unease from earlier grew stronger. I went back inside, locking the door behind me. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Katie's strange behavior, the conversation about cheating, the ashes in the fireplace, it was all adding up to something, but I wasn't sure what. All I knew was that I couldn't ignore it anymore. Lying in bed next to Katie that night, I couldn't sleep. She was already out, her breathing slow and even, completely unaware of the storm brewing in my mind. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those ashes. The open door, and Katie's two casual comments during the movie. What if? I rolled over, staring at the ceiling. Could Katie really be hiding something from me? After all these years, I thought I knew her, trusted her. But now, doubt was creeping in, and it was impossible to ignore. I remembered something. A few months back, Katie had joined an animal lovers club at work. She'd been so excited about it, and at first, I hadn't thought anything of it. But now, had that been an excuse? My heart started pounding. I couldn't take it anymore. I needed to know. Quietly, I slipped out of bed and tiptoed downstairs. Her phone was on the kitchen counter, charging. I glanced back up the stairs, listening for any sign of movement. Nothing. I unlocked her phone. We knew each other's passcodes, and that little trust we had shared now felt like a double-edged sword. My fingers trembled as I scrolled through her messages. That's when I saw it. Tom Rollins. A long thread of texts between them. Dating back weeks, maybe months. Some of them were innocent enough, work-related at first. But then I saw the photos. The flirting, the inside jokes, and my stomach dropped. There it was, in plain view. The truth I hadn't wanted to believe. Katie was having an affair. I sat there, staring at her phone in disbelief, my mind racing. My heart pounded so loudly I was afraid Katie might hear it from upstairs. I scrolled further, my eyes scanning the texts, each one like a hammer blow. Tom Rollins. I knew the name. He was a colleague from her office. They'd worked on some project together a while back. I hadn't thought much of it at the time. He was just another face in a sea of coworkers. But now I saw it all differently. There were messages about late meetings, drinks after work, hotel stays that didn't add up. I clicked on a photo, Katie, smiling, standing in front of a bar I didn't recognize. And there was Tom, next to her, his arm around her waist. My hands clenched around the phone. The bile rising in my throat. The worst part was the casual nature of it all. They weren't even trying to hide it in the texts. They joked about keeping it professional, while clearly being anything but. There were dinner receipts, hotel confirmations. Everything was laid out for me, and yet Katie had acted like nothing was wrong. I couldn't stay still any longer. My hands shook as I placed the phone back on the counter, careful to leave everything as it was. I stumbled into the living room, trying to steady my breath. How had I been so blind? How had I not seen this coming? The next morning, the weight of the previous night's discovery was still heavy on my chest. I hadn't slept much, my mind racing with every possible scenario, every moment where I could have noticed something sooner. As I stood in the kitchen, watching the coffee brew, I could hear Katie moving around upstairs, oblivious to what was about to happen. I wasn't sure how I was going to bring it up, or if I even wanted to. Part of me was still in shock, clinging to the hope that maybe I had misread the situation, that there was some explanation that made sense. But the texts, the photos, the receipts, they painted a clear picture. Katie came downstairs, her hair still damp from the shower, wearing the same casual smile she always had in the mornings. She kissed me on the cheek and went to pour herself a cup of coffee. Everything felt painfully normal. I couldn't take it anymore. "Who's Tom Rollins?" I asked, my voice steady, but the anger simmering just beneath the surface. Katie froze for a split second, but it was enough. I saw the fear flash in her eyes before she quickly recovered, turning to face me with a confused expression. "What?" she said, her voice calm, too calm. "Why are you asking about Tom?" "I saw the messages, Katie," I said, my hands gripping the edge of the counter. "The photos, the receipts. I know what's going on." Her face went pale. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. For a moment, we just stood there, the silence between us thick with tension. Finally, she let out a shaky breath and ran a hand through her hair. "It's not what you think," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Tom and it was just a mistake." "A mistake?" I repeated, my voice rising. "A mistake that's been going on for months? You think I'm stupid, Katie? I saw everything." She stepped closer, reaching for my arm, but I pulled away. "Please, listen to me," she said, her voice cracking. "It didn't mean anything. I don't even know why it happened. I was just, I don't know, lost." "Lost?" I said, shaking my head. "That's your excuse? You were lost." Katie's eyes filled with tears, but I couldn't bring myself to feel any sympathy. She had lied to me, betrayed me, and now she was standing there, trying to act like it didn't mean anything. "I can't believe you," I said, my voice cold. "I trusted you, Katie. I thought we had something real." She wiped at her eyes, shaking her head. "We do. We still do," she said, her voice desperate. "I love you, and I want to fix this. Please, just give me a chance to explain." But I didn't want explanations. I didn't want to hear any more lies. The damage had been done, and there was no going back. "Just stop," I said, turning away from her. "I don't want to hear it." The rest of the day was a blur. Katie had gone to work, leaving me alone with my thoughts. I paced the house, trying to make sense of everything, but all I could think about was how easily she had lied to my face. The betrayal cut deeper than I ever imagined it could. By the time the afternoon rolled around, I couldn't take it anymore. I needed answers. I needed to understand why this had happened. So, I decided to reach out to someone who might have a clearer view of the situation, Tom's wife, Alice. I had met Alice once, briefly, at a company holiday party a couple of years ago. She seemed nice, friendly, The type of person who wouldn't let something like this go unnoticed. If Tom was cheating on her with Katie, there was no way she wouldn't have picked up on it by now. I found her contact information online and sent her a message, keeping it simple. I didn't want to come off too strong, but I needed to know if she was aware of what was going on. Hi Alice, this is my name. We met at the holiday party a while back. I was wondering if you had some time to talk? There's something I think we both need to discuss. I hit send and stared at the screen, my heart pounding in my chest. A part of me wasn't sure if this was the right thing to do. But I couldn't sit by and let this all play out without taking some kind of action. It didn't take long for her to respond. Within minutes, a message popped up on my phone. Hey, my name, sure, I'd be happy to talk. What's going on? We arranged to meet later that evening at a local coffee shop. The hours leading up to that meeting dragged on, my mind racing with every possible scenario. Was she going to confirm my worst fears? Or was there something else going on that I didn't know about? When I arrived at the coffee shop, Alice was already there, sitting at a table by the window. She looked tense, her hands gripping the edge of her cup as she stared out at the street. I took a deep breath and walked over, sitting down across from her. Thanks for meeting me, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Alice nodded, but her eyes were full of questions. Of course. So, what's going on? I hesitated for a moment, not sure how to start. But there was no point in beating around the bush. I had to get it out. I think my wife is having an affair with your husband, I said, my voice low. Alice's eyes widened in shock, her mouth falling open slightly. She stared at me for a moment, then shook her head. Are you serious? I nodded, pulling out my phone and showing her some of the texts I had found. She leaned in, her face growing paler with each message she read. I had a feeling, she whispered, her voice shaking. I've suspected something for a while now, but I didn't have any proof. The confirmation hit me like a punch to the gut. I had hoped, somehow, that I was wrong. That maybe there was some other explanation. But now, sitting here with Alice, it was clear that both of us had been betrayed. Leaving the coffee shop, my mind was in turmoil. Alice's confirmation had cemented everything I'd feared, and now, there was no escaping the truth. Katie had been lying to me for months, playing me for a fool while she carried on with Tom. I wasn't angry anymore, I was furious. Betrayal, I could handle, but the sheer audacity of it all, the carelessness with which they'd both acted, it filled me with a rage I didn't know I was capable of. I couldn't just sit back and let them get away with it. No, they had to pay. The idea started to form in my head as I drove home, the wheels turning faster with every mile. If they had been so reckless with their affair, then surely, there were more secrets hidden beneath the surface. Secrets that I could use to bring them both down. Once I got home, I went straight to my office and pulled out my laptop. I had already found some incriminating evidence on Katie's phone, but now I needed to dig deeper. I started looking into Tom's life, his work, his financial records, anything I could get my hands on. It didn't take long to find something. A series of questionable financial transactions tied to a company project that Tom had been leading. The numbers didn't add up, and it didn't take a genius to see that something shady was going on. If this got out, it could ruin his career. A smile crept onto my face as I gathered the evidence, my mind racing with the possibilities. I wasn't just going to confront him. I was going to destroy him. But that wasn't enough. Katie had to face the consequences too. I couldn't stand the thought of her getting away with this, pretending like nothing had happened. She had lied to me, betrayed me, and now she had to pay for it. I began drafting an anonymous letter to Tom's boss, detailing the affair and the financial discrepancies I had uncovered. Along with it, I attached copies of the incriminating texts and photos. Let's see how they explain their way out of this one. Katie and Tom had thought they could play me, but they were about to learn just how wrong they were. The next few days felt like I was living in a state of suspended reality. Katie went about her usual routine, completely unaware of the storm brewing just beneath the surface. She smiled, she laughed, she kissed me on the cheek before heading out to work, each gesture like a stab to the heart. I kept my distance, holding on to the knowledge of what I had uncovered, waiting for the right moment to set everything in motion. It was a strange kind of power, knowing the truth while she remained oblivious. I wasn't ready to confront her yet. Not until I had everything in place. The anonymous letter had been sent to Tom's boss, and now it was just a waiting game. I knew that once it hit, there'd be no turning back. His career, his life, it would all come crashing down, and with it, Katie's perfect little world. It was only a matter of time. Meanwhile, I couldn't help but keep digging. Something inside me needed to know every detail of her betrayal. Each new discovery was like picking at a scab, painful but impossible to resist. I started tracking her movements, nothing too obvious, just subtle things. Checking her phone when she wasn't looking, noting the time she left and came home from work. It didn't take long to confirm what I already knew. She was still seeing Tom. Slipping out for lunch dates, long phone calls that she pretended were work-related. It was all so blatant, as if she had stopped caring whether I noticed or not. Maybe she thought I was too stupid, too trusting to ever suspect her. But the more I watched, the more I realized that Katie wasn't as composed as she appeared. There were cracks in her facade, small but noticeable. She would glance at her phone nervously when a message came through, her smile faltering ever so slightly. She was hiding something, but now I was the one with the upper hand. And that's when it hit me, I wasn't just going to expose them. I was going to make her admit it. Face to face, no more lies, no more excuses. I wanted to see the look on her face when she realized I knew everything. The only question was when. By the middle of the week, the tension was almost unbearable. I had planned it all out in my head, rehearsed every possible scenario. How would she react? Would she deny it at first, or would she crumble under the weight of her guilt? Either way, I was ready. The timing had to be perfect, though. I wanted her to have no way out, no chance to concoct some last-minute excuse. That's why I chose Friday night, the one evening we always spent together, no matter how busy our schedules were. We had a tradition of ordering takeout, watching some mindless TV, and pretending for a few hours that everything was perfect. It was ironic, really. While she had been sneaking around with Tom, we'd been maintaining this ridiculous pretense of normalcy. But this Friday would be different. This Friday, the truth would come out. Katie came home from work looking tired, but she still greeted me with that same fake smile. I played along, acting like nothing was wrong, offering her a glass of wine as we sat down on the couch. The minutes dragged on, each one pulling me closer to the inevitable confrontation. Finally, as the credits rolled on whatever show we had been half watching, I couldn't wait any longer. I set my wine glass down and turned to face her, my heart pounding in my chest. "Katie, we need to talk." She looked at me, startled by the sudden seriousness in my tone. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice uncertain. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. "I know about you and Tom." Her reaction was immediate. Her face went pale, her eyes widening in shock. For a moment, she didn't say anything, just stared at me as if she couldn't believe what she was hearing. "I don't know what you're talking about," she finally said, her voice trembling. "Don't lie to me, Katie," I snapped, my anger bubbling to the surface. "I've seen the messages, the photos. I know everything." She blinked, her hands shaking as she set her own glass down. "Please, let me explain." "There's nothing to explain," I interrupted, my voice rising. "You've been cheating on me for months, and you thought I wouldn't find out? You thought you could just keep lying to my face, acting like everything's fine?" Katie's eyes filled with tears, but I didn't care. Not anymore. She had made her bed, and now she was going to lie in it. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I never wanted to hurt you." "But you did," I said coldly. "You hurt me every single day you lied to me, every time you snuck off to be with him." The silence that followed was suffocating. Katie sat there, tears streaming down her face, while I stood, the weight of everything pressing down on me. I had waited so long for this moment, but now that it was here, it didn't feel like the victory I had imagined. Katie stayed silent for what felt like an eternity, her hands trembling in her lap. The tears continued to flow, but I wasn't moved. Not this time. I had given her so many chances, more than she deserved. And now, I was done. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "What do you want me to say? That I'm sorry? That it was a mistake? You won't believe me anyway." "Because it's not just a mistake," I said, my voice cold. "It's months of lying, sneaking around, betraying me. You don't just make a mistake for that long, Katie. You made a choice." She flinched at my words, her eyes dropping to the floor. I could see the guilt weighing on her, but it didn't make me feel any better. It didn't erase what she had done. "I don't know why I did it," she finally admitted, her voice breaking. "I was lonely, and Tom, he was there, and it just happened." "That's not an excuse," I snapped. If you were lonely, you should have talked to me. You should have tried to fix what was wrong instead of running off to someone else. Katie nodded, wiping at her eyes. I know. You're right. I was selfish. I didn't think about how much I was hurting you. I stood there, staring at her, trying to process everything. Part of me wanted to scream, to throw something, to make her feel even a fraction of the pain I was feeling. But another part of me, maybe the part that had once loved her, just felt empty. So what now? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. What do we do now? Katie looked up at me, her eyes red and swollen from crying. I don't know, she said softly. But I don't want to lose you. I'll do anything to fix this, I swear. I let out a bitter laugh. You think you can fix this? After everything you've done? It's not that simple, Katie. I know, she said quickly, her voice desperate. But I'm willing to try. I'll do whatever it takes. I'll cut things off with Tom. I'll go to counseling. Anything. Just, please don't leave me. Her words hung in the air, and for a moment, I didn't know how to respond. Part of me wanted to believe her, to think that maybe, just maybe, we could work through this. But the other part of me, the rational part, knew that it wasn't that easy. Trust, once broken, couldn't be repaired with promises and apologies. I don't know if I can do this, I said quietly, my heart heavy with the weight of the decision I was about to make. I don't know if I can ever trust you again. Katie's face crumpled, and she reached for me, but I pulled away. I wasn't ready to forgive her. I didn't know if I ever would be. I need some time, I said, turning away from her. I need to think about what I want. What we want. And with that, I walked out of the room, leaving her alone with her guilt. The days following my confrontation with Katie were marked by a tense, uneasy silence. We barely spoke to each other, each of us walking on eggshells as we went through the motions of our daily lives. The house, once filled with laughter and the usual noise of our routines, now felt eerily quiet, like the calm before a storm. Katie made good on her promise to cut things off with Tom. At least, that's what she told me. I didn't see any more suspicious texts or phone calls, and she stayed home after work, avoiding the social events she used to attend. But despite her efforts, I couldn't shake the feeling that it was all too little, too late. Trust, once broken, is nearly impossible to repair. I found myself questioning everything she said and did, constantly wondering if she was telling me the truth or simply feeding me more lies. Every time her phone buzzed, even if it was just a work notification, my heart would race, and my mind would jump to the worst possible conclusion. I tried to focus on work, to distract myself from the chaos that had taken over my personal life. But it was difficult to concentrate when all I could think about was how easily everything had fallen apart. I found myself replaying the events of the past few months over and over in my head, trying to pinpoint the exact moment when things had started to go wrong. Had I been too trusting? Too naive? Or had I simply ignored the warning signs, too comfortable in my belief that our marriage was solid? One evening, after another long, silent dinner, Katie finally broke the tension. I've been thinking, she said quietly, not meeting my eyes. I know I messed up. I know I hurt you, and I don't expect you to forgive me right away. But I think, maybe we should go to counseling. Try to work through this. Together. Her suggestion caught me off guard. I hadn't considered counseling, not seriously, at least. In my mind, the damage was already done. How could a few therapy sessions possibly fix what had been broken? But the look on Katie's face was so desperate, so full of regret, that I hesitated. She was trying, in her own way. And despite everything, I wasn't ready to throw away years of marriage without at least attempting to see if there was anything left to salvage. I don't know if counseling can fix this, I said slowly. But I guess it's worth a try. Katie's eyes lit up with a glimmer of hope, and for the first time in days, I saw a spark of the woman I had fallen in love with. But even as I agreed to give counseling a chance, a part of me wondered if it was too late, if the trust we had lost could ever truly be restored. The first counseling session was awkward, to say the least. We sat in the waiting room in uncomfortable silence, neither of us knowing what to expect. The therapist, a calm, middle-aged woman named Dr. Harris, welcomed us into her office with a warm smile and a soft voice that instantly put me on edge. As we sat down, Katie glanced at me nervously, and I realized just how uncomfortable this was for her too. But I wasn't ready to let my guard down just yet. I had agreed to try counseling, but I wasn't convinced it would help. Dr. Harris started the session by asking us to explain why we were there. Katie spoke first, her voice trembling as she recounted the affair and how she had let things spiral out of control. I sat there, listening, but not really hearing her words. I had already gone through this conversation in my head 100 times. When it was my turn to speak, I hesitated. I didn't know how to put my feelings into words, how to explain the depth of the betrayal I felt. But Dr. Harris was patient, guiding me with gentle questions until the floodgates finally opened. "I don't trust her," I said bluntly, my voice harsher than I intended. "How am I supposed to believe anything she says after what she's done? Every time she tells me she's sorry, I just keep thinking about how many times she's lied to my face. How do I get past that?" Dr. Harris nodded thoughtfully, giving me a moment to collect myself before responding. "Trust is a fragile thing," she said softly. "It can take years to build and only moments to destroy. But that doesn't mean it can't be rebuilt. It takes time, effort, and a willingness to be vulnerable with each other again. Both of you need to decide if that's something you're willing to do." Katie looked at me, her eyes pleading. "I want to try," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I know I broke your trust, and I'll do whatever it takes to earn it back. But I need you to give me a chance. Please." I didn't respond right away. Part of me wanted to forgive her, to move on and rebuild what we had lost. But another part of me, the part that had been hurt so deeply, wasn't ready to let go of the anger and resentment. The rest of the session focused on communication, with Dr. Harris encouraging us to express our feelings honestly and openly. It was difficult, painful even, but I could see that Katie was genuinely trying. And for the first time in weeks, I felt a small flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, we could find a way forward. But that hope was fragile, and I knew it would take more than a few therapy sessions to truly heal the wounds that had been inflicted. As the weeks went on, we continued to attend counseling, slowly chipping away at the wall that had been built between us. Dr. Harris helped us navigate the complex emotions we were both feeling: guilt, anger, regret, and fear. I could see that Katie was committed to repairing the damage she had caused, but I still couldn't shake the doubts that lingered in the back of my mind. Every time Katie's phone buzzed, my heart would skip a beat. Even though she had promised to cut off all contact with Tom, I couldn't stop myself from wondering if she was still hiding something from me. Trust, once shattered, was nearly impossible to rebuild, and no amount of therapy seemed to ease the constant anxiety I felt. One night, after another long day of counseling, I sat alone in the living room, scrolling through old photos on my phone. Pictures of Katie and me, smiling, happy, blissfully unaware of the chaos that would one day unravel our lives. It was hard to believe that the woman in those photos was the same person who had betrayed me so deeply. And yet, despite everything, part of me still loved her. That realization hit me harder than I expected. I had spent so long focusing on the anger, the betrayal, that I hadn't allowed myself to truly process the love that still lingered beneath the surface. But loving her didn't erase the pain. It didn't make the betrayal any less real. As I sat there, lost in my thoughts, my phone buzzed with a new message. I glanced at the screen, expecting a work email or some other mundane notification. But instead, it was from Alice, Tom's soon-to-be ex-wife. "Hey, just checking in. How are things going?" I stared at the message, unsure how to respond. Alice and I hadn't spoken much since our initial meeting, but she had been a source of comfort during those dark days when I first discovered the affair. We had shared our pain, bonded over the betrayal we both had endured. I typed out a quick response: "It's complicated. How about you?" Her reply came almost immediately. "Same here. It's been rough, but I'm getting through it. We should grab coffee sometime, catch up." For a moment, I hesitated. Meeting Alice again felt dangerous. There was something unspoken between us, a connection born out of our shared suffering. But at the same time, I craved the distraction, the escape from the constant tension at home. I typed back, my fingers moving almost on their own. "Yeah, that sounds good. Let me know when." As I hit send, a knot of guilt tightened in my chest. I wasn't sure what I was doing, or why I felt the need to reach out to Alice. Maybe it was because she understood what I was going through in a way that Katie never could. Or maybe it was because, deep down, I was still searching for something I wasn't sure I could find in my marriage anymore. Whatever it was, I couldn't deny the pull I felt toward Alice. And as the days went on, that pull only grew stronger. The day I met Alice for coffee, the air was crisp, and the cafe was bustling with the sounds of chatter and clinking mugs. I spotted her at a small table by the window, her hair pulled back into a neat bun, her face showing signs of exhaustion despite the makeup she wore. She smiled as I approached, but there was something in her eyes that told me she was just as conflicted as I was about meeting. "Hey," she said softly as I sat down, her fingers nervously tapping on the edge of her coffee cup. "Thanks for coming." "Of course," I replied, trying to sound casual, though my own nerves were buzzing. There was an unspoken tension between us, a lingering question of why we had both agreed to this meeting. Was it just a vent about our shared betrayal? Or was there something more? Something we weren't ready to admit. We exchanged the usual pleasantries at first, how work was going, how life was treating us. But it didn't take long for the conversation to turn back to what had brought us here in the first place, Tom and Katie. "I just can't wrap my head around it," Alice said, her voice tinged with frustration. "We had our issues, sure, but I never thought it would come to this. I thought I knew him." "I know exactly what you mean," I replied, nodding in agreement. "Katie was the last person I ever expected to do something like this. It's like the woman I married doesn't even exist anymore." Alice sighed, stirring her coffee absent-mindedly. "It's strange, isn't it? How you can spend years with someone, build a life with them, and then one day, everything just falls apart. Like none of it ever mattered." Her words hit close to home, and for a moment, I didn't know how to respond. She was right, of course. It was exactly how I had been feeling. Like all the love and trust I had put into my marriage had been a waste. A lie. But as we sat there, commiserating over our shared pain, I couldn't help but feel that there was something else happening between us. An unspoken understanding, a connection that went beyond our mutual betrayal. It was comforting, in a way, to be with someone who truly understood what I was going through. But it was also dangerous. As the conversation continued, I found myself drawn to her in a way I hadn't expected. It wasn't just the fact that we had both been hurt by our spouses, it was something deeper. Maybe it was the fact that, for the first time in months, I didn't feel like I was walking on eggshells. With Alice, I could be honest about my feelings without fear of judgment or recrimination. We stayed at the cafe for hours, long after our cups had run dry, talking about everything from our failed marriages to our hopes for the future. By the time we finally stood to leave, it felt like a weight had been lifted off my chest. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I wasn't alone. "Thanks for this," Alice said as we stepped outside. "I didn't realize how much I needed to talk to someone who understood." "Same here," I admitted, smiling. "It's nice to feel like I'm not going crazy." She laughed, but it was a sad, hollow sound. "Yeah, we'll get through this, right?" "I hope so," I said, though even as I said the words, I wasn't sure I believed them. As we said our goodbyes and went our separate ways, I couldn't shake the feeling that this meeting had been more than just a way to vent. Something had shifted between us. And while I didn't know exactly what it meant, I knew one thing for sure: I wasn't ready to let go of that connection just yet. Days turned into weeks, and the fragile balance between Katie and me grew more tenuous with each passing moment. Counseling helped to keep the lines of communication open, but the underlying trust issues remained. Every time I saw her, I couldn't stop thinking about the affair, about Tom, about everything she had hidden from me. And every time I met Alice, that connection between us grew stronger, pulling me further away from the idea of ever fully repairing my marriage. Katie noticed the shift, too. She was trying, she really was, but there was a sense of desperation in her efforts, like she was holding on to something that was already slipping through her fingers. Our conversations were forced, our interactions stiff. The intimacy that had once been the foundation of our relationship had withered, leaving behind only the ghost of what we used to be. One evening, after another tense counseling session, Katie and I sat at the dinner table in silence, the air between us heavy with everything we weren't saying. She picked at her food, her eyes downcast, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a pang of guilt. "I've been thinking," I said, breaking the silence. "Maybe we should take a break. From all of this. From each other." Katie looked up at me, her eyes wide with shock. "What are you saying?" "I don't know," I admitted, running a hand through my hair. I feel like we're going around in circles. We keep talking about fixing things, but it doesn't feel like anything is actually changing. Maybe some time apart will give us both a chance to figure out what we really want." Her face crumpled, and for a moment, I thought she might start crying. But instead, she nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. If that's what you think is best. It's not about what's best, I said, my own voice heavy with frustration. It's about what's real. I don't want to keep pretending that everything's fine when it's not. We need to be honest with each other. Katie stared at me for a long moment, her expression a mix of hurt and resignation. I don't want to lose you, she said quietly. I'll do anything to make this work. I sighed, feeling the weight of her words. I know, but right now, I don't even know if I want this to work. That was the truth of it. I didn't know what I wanted anymore. Part of me still loved Katie, still wanted to believe that we could somehow rebuild what we had lost. But another part of me, a growing part, wasn't sure if that was even possible. The trust was gone, and without it, what were we left with? That night, after Katie had gone to bed, I found myself scrolling through my phone again, my thumb hovering over Alice's name. I hesitated for a moment, knowing that reaching out to her again was dangerous. But the pull was too strong to resist. Hey, I typed, my heart racing as I hit send. Can we talk? Her response came almost immediately. Of course. What's going on? I don't know, I replied, my fingers moving faster now. I'm lost. I don't know what to do. There was a pause, and for a moment, I thought she wasn't going to respond. But then, her next message came through, you're not alone in that. We should meet. And just like that, I knew where I was headed. I didn't know if it was the right choice, but I knew it was the one I was going to make. The next day, I told Katie I was leaving for a while. I didn't say where I was going, and she didn't ask. The look on her face told me everything I needed to know, she knew. Deep down, that this was the beginning of the end. As I drove away from the house, my mind racing with everything that had happened, I couldn't help but think about Alice. About the connection we had forged in the ashes of our broken marriages. And as I pulled into the parking lot of the cafe where we had met before, I realized that this was the crossroads I had been dreading. There were no easy answers, no clear path forward. Only choices that would define the rest of my life. And in that moment, I wasn't sure which path I was going to take.